Hi everyone, this is Akira, this is Megumi, and we're talking about, well, we're doing this kind of new series we call like you ask, we answer, and we get asked a lot of questions about noodles, ramen, udon, and like yeah, a lot of questions about these things like we sell and like we teach, right? So, and there are some questions that like we can't really answer like right away because like we don't actually know like we haven't done it before. So like to answer these questions, like we actually do them, like we try them, so we experiment them, right? And so to be able to like answer these questions with some clarity, right? So in this series, you ask, we answer. We'll try to well, try our best to answer these questions by actually doing this, like trying these out, right? So you got some questions today, and like we'll try our best to like answer. And so let's go through them one by one in more detail. Like I have like some slides I prepared for these questions, and like um, last answer has to do with like the noodle machine and like noodles. So yeah, Megumi is gonna actually show us like demonstrate you know the noodle machine like by to answer this question. So um, what we are going through today, right? Like we've got like four questions, and the first one has to do with what determines noodle color, and this is some question that like we get asked a lot. And so how best to store fresh noodles, right? And best ways to cook noodles, and what is the relative capacity of different noodle machines? So these are the questions like we got asked like probably more than 10 times at least, right? So let's go through these questions one by one. And so what determines noodle color and specifically, right? So what pigment or coloring agent can we use in noodle making or and what quantity that that's appropriate, right? Um, so color is an important factor when it comes to like noodle making, fresh noodles, attractive to customers. And well, bringing the vivid color into noodles is one way to make your noodles delicious, right? And but this could be challenging, right? Depending on what colors you're trying to bring into your noodles and the ingredients you use, right? And that yellow, right, is a basic color that is familiar to us, like in relation to ramen noodles. And for example, like when making miso ramen noodles like this, right? The color, yellow color, like may seem to go well with the dark brown color of like the soup, right? But how do we color noodles yellow, right? And many think that the color comes from like use of eggs, right? But more specifically the yolk, right? But noodles without eggs are colored yellow as well, and that's well by adding kansui. And we actually make noodles kind of pale yellow, and we have learned that the use of kansui in ramen noodles brings out like special noodle color and flavors. And but like it also turns out that it brings out like yellow color by affecting the flavonoid pigment in wheat flours, specifically by adding like potassium carbonate in kansui to wheat flours, you can make yellow noodles, right? But you think that it's not yellow enough, right? And like if you want to make your noodles more yellow and brighter, you may want to use the gardenia pigment natural food colorant and or vitamin B2, right? And the usage is very small, like compared to the amount of flour like we use, and usually use like 0.2% of like total solid ingredients. So, for example, like if you use like 10 kilograms of flour, right, we just use 10 grams of pigment powder dissolved in water before we add it to the flour mixing, right? And there are many other types of colors like we can do, right? Like as you can see, like in this picture, there are many types like we've tried right before, and the noodles like color differently. But like the thing is that like you have to see how the color changes, like when the noodles are boiled, cooked. Some of the noodles are actually well, some of the colors, some of the ingredients we use well, they didn't turn out great when we cooked the noodles. So you really have to, try them out, see when they like, it's the percentage rate will be like to the, well, in comparison to the solid ingredient stuff is also important too. And then, so of course, like when you use these ingredients, like for example, like um, spinach powder and stuff like that, then that will also, well, give us some like flavors as well, in addition to the color. So that's another thing. All right, so next question is, so how to store fresh noodles. So how noodles can or should be stored to keep them fresh, safe, or even improve their taste and texture-wise qualities. And yeah, like proper storage of fresh noodles, like, is a question that like we get asked like probably more than 100 times. And well, we have like 3 tips for you guys. And so that's keep them from drying and prevent condensation and optimal storing temperature. So, so first we want to cover fresh noodles all the time, right? Because when noodles are exposed to the air, they will dry fast over time. We want to put a cover on them, like to prevent them from drying. It's very important. When noodles lose moisture, they tend to get, like longer to cook and like lose noodle texture quickly when cooked. So they'll be like hard to handle. Like, when they dry, like they get crunchy and like they are easy to break, right? So we need to like put a plastic bag or cloth or some kind of like lid over fresh noodles. When storing them in the fridge, right? Put them in a container, right? Ideally like resin container and with a like water absorbing paper on the bottom and the top of noodles, right? And so these papers like help absorb any moisture that come out of noodles without wetting them. Like so that's how you store them. And so another thing, like, we need to like prevent condensation. So when we make fresh noodles, right, it's a process that like ingredients go through, from flour liquid to like strands of noodles. And so when noodles are freshly made, right, they're warm, right? They're warm because some heat was generated through production. So let's say that like we make noodles, right, and then right after that, like the noodle temperature is like 30 degrees Celsius or something, and we want to like leave them at, well, room temperature before we put in the fridge, and so that the temperature like probably goes down like probably to like room temperature, like maybe 20 degrees Celsius or something, and then we can put in the fridge. But like if you put them in the fridge, right, right after we make them, then there's a gap, right? Like there's a big gap like between the noodle temperature and then the temperature of refrigerator, right? Like which is, let's say, like set at like 10 degrees Celsius. So that's gonna, well, dry the moisture out of the noodles, and then like if you have the like plastic bag or something, like plastic cover on top, and then or next day like you open the fridge and like check the noodles, and then you see all these like that driplets of the water, right, on the plastic bag, and some of the noodles like get wet, and they're ruined basically. So to avoid condensation, we keep noodle away from like drastic temperature changes. And so um, storing fresh noodles in the fridge in a way like to age noodles for better texture. And so what's noodle aging, right? So fresh noodles become tighter and harder over time as they lose like moisture over time, like refrigerator, and then they gain smoothness and bounciness and translucency, right? So they become noodles that are like kind of chewy and that last longer, like in terms of texture in hot soup. But at the same time, they lose something that's wheat flavor, right? Over time, and so it's a trade-off between like noodle texture and wheat flavor. Like when we age noodles in the refrigerator, and basically the higher the temperature, the faster the noodle age. So you want to set the temperature of the fridge like at the proper temperature for proper aging, right? And we recommend that 10 degrees, around like 10 degrees Celsius, and noodles age over time, right? And then there should be like the best time for your noodles to be served to the customer. And as noodle texture, color, and flavor change over time, right? You know, I think you should try them, right? Like over a period of like few days to find the best timing for noodles, right? Um, it's like one like first day, like after like you make noodles, and then second day and third day, like they change over time, right? So the quality of ramen noodles like usually go up, right, over time of like aging up to like 7 days after they're made. And after seventh day and after like 14 days, like the quality may go down. So um, yeah, so that like that aging, noodle aging, like something you may want to consider, like for like when you're storing the noodles. And that's a temperature. And so how to cook noodles, right? So I think this is probably the most frequently asked questions. Yeah, yes, cooking noodles can make or break delicious noodles, and this is a critical process. Many, right, like including professional chefs, get wrong. So I think it's worth some explanation. And like by effectively cooking noodles, you can serve a great bowl of ramen noodles or like real noodles, and make it like it's a night and day difference. And you will not believe like they're the same noodles like if you eat them. So let's go over the tips that we have over here. Like, so there are six of them, and so first one, like pay attention to your cooking water, and prepare enough boiling water for the quantity of noodles you're cooking, and do not stir noodle too hard, and maintain the cooking temperature, and check noodle texture a bit earlier than fully cooking them, and strain cooking water as much as you can before you serve it. And so like you have to pay attention to your cooking water, and I think I've like touched on it like before, but like it's a soft water, like cooking water should be like soft water. And soft water means, that there's no minerals contained in water. And then, minerals like, calcium, like magnesium, like so. If you have like hard water, right? There are a lot of them like already in the water. And basically, the process of cooking is like, well, it's kind of like transferring like all these like calcium and salt and other things that right contained in the noodles right out of the noodles into the cooking water, and the noodles absorb cooking water in exchange, right? And then that's sort of like how the noodle gets cooked, right? But like if you have like a lot of stuff like already in the water, then there's just less room, right, for all these stuff to like to be released to. So it just takes time, right? And then when it takes time to cook the noodles, right? The surface of the noodle, like it melts, and melting noodle surface, that's not a good, that doesn't like bring out like a good texture. So by cooking new noodles like in hard water, like just takes not only like just takes time, longer time, but also you are ruining the noodle texture. Like you've worked so hard to develop up to this point. So um, yeah, and then what we recommend is like you should check your water first, like to see like how hard it is, like how soft it is, and well, in some cases like you don't even have to like well bother to change like convert your water to or soft water by using like things like softener. Yeah, so yeah, like first step like you do like just to check it, right? Check your water first, right? So, but like if it's hard enough, then when installing a softener like makes a huge difference in terms of the quality of noodles, and then the time like it takes to cook noodles, which translates to like a lot of money for gas and everything. So And another thing about like paying attention to water is that like well that's the pH level of water. This is a study we did like the by like cooking water, I mean cooking noodles in this water that's neutral and light alkaline and light acid and like what we found out is that like well the y-axis is that like amount of noodles that like that gets dissolved, right, in cooking water. So like if you cook noodles, right, some of the noodles melt into the cooking water, and well, if the pH level of the cooking water is like neutral, like 7, right, pH level 7, then we lost about like almost like 30% noodles that we're cooking. That's a lot of noodles, right? But if the water is like a light acid, like 5, 6, or like light alkaline, like 9, 10, then this amount, right, of like the amount of like noodles like we lose in the cooking dropped like dramatically, right? So check your like pH level, like with cooking water, and like or you can just actually by adding like vinegar or something, or like Kansi is like itself is makes the cooking water like alkaline. So yeah, so by like cooking ramen noodles with Kansi containing them, well, you naturally changing the cooking water to light alkaline. So that's another thing that we should be worried about, like when cooking noodles. And so prepare enough like boiling water for the noodles you're cooking, and um, it's actually two things, right? I'm talking about, but like we want to have like boiling water first, right? So water needs to be boiling before we put noodles in the cooking in the cooker. We want to have enough of it, and ideally we want to have like 20 times water, that like the weight of noodles we're cooking. But if you only have like a small cooker, it'll give you like as much as 10 times, right? To give like noodles enough room cooking, right, the water should be like 10 to 20 times the weight of noodles. So cooking temperature should be, well, which I'm going to talk about later, but like 98 degrees Celsius. And when serving like noodles in boiling water, like when we put a bowl noodles in a cooker, of course, like it's gonna reduce the cooking temperature, right? So we want to wait until the cooking temperature gets back before adding another serving. Um, okay, so but anyway, like the has to be boiling, and then enough water, right? And don't stir noodles too hard, like especially at the beginning of the like cooking. And well, when the like noodles are like fresh and like you put in a hot water, like cooking water, and they are very very fragile. So then like well, we have to be gentle, right? Like when like storing them, and we try to like spread them like in a cross water, right? And then so that like the noodles, like all the noodles, like all the areas of noodle strands, like get um, all the heating, right, in the water as much as possible, like equally as much as possible. So um, then like if you like stir them hard, like at the beginning of the cooking, then we may break them. Right? So and then if you're cooking like frozen noodles, you should put them like the portion that's still frozen, right? And then defrosting them like wouldn't like do good because they get wet and like they get like all tangled up, and like it would be like kind of hard to like entangle them, like disentangle them. So um, yeah, so do not start too hard, right? Especially at the beginning of cooking. And so maintain cooking temperature. So 90, well, I said 98, but like 98.6 degrees Celsius. But like we, well, it's kind of hard for us to like probably keep the temperature at that kind of with that precision. But like optimal cooking temperature. Maintaining it throughout cooking is, critical. And If the temperature goes above it, the boiling may damage noodles, right? But like it goes below it, the noodles like not getting cooked effectively. So after putting in a portion of fresh noodles, they start floating, and we should reduce the heat a little bit to keep it like sort of like simmering. Um, you know, you don't want to add water into your noodle cooker while cooking noodles, and because it reduces the cooking temperature, right? But if you do, make sure it is hot water you're adding. So when you add like well portion noodles, then the cooking temperature drops, right? So like we want to wait until like gets back up, and of course like to speed up the process, we want to well yeah have like efficient like really powerful noodle cooker. And speaking of noodle cooker, right? Like, well, it's kind of noodle cooker we want to have. Like, this is for basically the ramen noodles. That that's typically cooked like individually in individual servings. And so there's a faucet, right, that runs salt water, ideally hot water, right, and keep cooking water as clean as possible during busy hours. And so there's like outside, right, outside of this frame of the cooker. So there's a sort of like a ditch, right, ditch that allows sort of like overflowing of cooking water. And there's a hole, right, drainage hole that helps, well, that drains the dirty water. And we want to have like high powered heating, the backside cooking temperature as quickly as possible. Yeah, so the yeah, so the chicken noodle texture a bit earlier than fully cooking them. So um, this is another thing that like to get a perfect noodle texture. So we want to check the noodle strands a little earlier than like time we know they get fully cooked. And because noodles keep cooking after like taking them out of the cooker. So depending on what kind of dish you're serving, right? We want to check the noodles earlier. And the noodles tend to be like need to be like gelatinized, which means that like starch of noodles like forms, kind of gel-like texture when heat and water are applied. And if noodles are not gelatinized, they're raw, basically. Like if you serve that to customers, like they probably get like stomachache or something. But after that, right, it's a matter of like how hard your customers want the noodles to be. So after taking strand of noodles earlier helps you find the best timing to take them out of the cooker. And if you're serving, cook, if you're cooking noodles for hot soup, you may want to finish cooking a minute earlier than fully cooked, right? So, and if you're cooking noodles for a cold dish, you may want to like overcook them, right, for a minute or so, because you chill them, right? You chill them, and like so the noodle texture like gets harder, right, when you chill them. So. And the last one is like sort of strain like cooking water as much as you can. So this isn't really like cooking noodle cooking technique, but like you want to strain out cooking water as much as you can off the noodles before you serve them, because cooking water contains a lot of unwanted stuff like constantly salt, like dissolve from noodles, right? So we want to remove them as much as we can before serving the noodles, because that's gonna well, contaminate the soup, and then if you're serving hot soup noodles, right, remaining cooking water on noodles, dilute the soup, so that's not a good thing, right? So, and yeah, so this is like you're washing the cooling, yeah, it's like washing noodles, right? Because there's a starch on the noodles, and that's like kind of slimy, sort of like a texture, and some people don't like it, so. We want to wash them in the sink, right? And then like for example, like tsukemen, right? Ramen noodles, like dipping noodles. They're very thick, and we usually wash them, like udon, right? We wash them and possibly chill them before we serve them. So washing is part of cooking process. So like we should remember. And so the last question is Um, so what is a relative like classic like different models like noodle making machines, depending on the type of like noodle they're used to produce. Yeah, we get asked a lot of questions. So like we have different models, like different models of noodle making machines, and it's like for example, like well, this particular piece of equipment like makes 100 servings per hour, and well, this one like does well, okay, 200 servings per hour, and but what does it mean, right? And it's really hard to explain my words, but like so I just want to go through like just a bit of process, like making process, right? And so so we use these kind of rollers, right? Set of rollers, and then to process the dough to make sheet, right? So we first do the like the rough forming, like so we make the sheet of dough, right? And then like we combine them through the same roller, and and then we thin it, right? We thin it, and so we repeat this process, right, to until we get the final thickness before we cut it, right? Then we won't we do the this rolling process, heating process like gradually, like we could well thin the dough like drastically like all at once, right? But like that's going to damage the gluten structure of the noodles, and then that's not good for the noodle texture, right? So do we have to like so like gradually we do it like so so that means that so basically right, and then like we so finally we cut it with this cutter, and so basically the smaller the size, right? Basically the smaller size, like it takes more time to get to that final thickness. So yeah, so like it takes more time, and then and it also like it has to do with like well different specs like hydration of noodle like noodle size and the serving size as well. Yeah, because if you're talking about like 100 servings of fresh noodles, right? But like in an hour from scratch, but you may not be able to like reach um, the performance level. Like if you're talking about like different noodles than the type of noodles the manufacturer has in mind. So production of two different noodles requires like different amount of work, right? And so what I mean by that is like, for example, like just making 100 servings of Hakata style tonkotsu noodles, like, which are hard and thin noodles, take the same amount of time as making, well, 100 servings like tsukeme noodles, like that are like soft and thick, right? Let's say Hakata style tonkotsu noodles are 1.1 millimeter in thickness, right? And tsukeme noodles like 2.2 millimeter in thickness. Which one do you think takes longer to make, right? And so, well, so by like let's demonstrate, like yeah, let's do it, like to see like if how like what I mean by that, right? Is actually see how they're made on the ramen noodle machine and like find out what I mean. So speaking, we're just gonna go through the process, making process, right? So like first, like we have to mix it, and then um, so what she put was like flour and yeah, flour like white egg and gluten powder, and that's the recipe for Hakata tonkotsu noodles. So sorry, so like miso ramen, yeah, Sapporo miso ramen noodles, and so those are solid ingredients, right? And then here we have like water and salt, and country, right? And then so this is the pigment we are talking about. That's the Jordania pigment, kind of orange color, right? The orange, and then like the amount of the pigment was not a lot, like probably 0.2% or so, like to the weight of flour. Yeah, and then so what we are doing, right, is that like we're gonna make new dough, and so when she's adding the this liquid, right, it's kind of sort of like yeah, so like orange color liquid, and until like so now the liquid is like kind of being added like little by little to the flour, solid ingredients, right, and um, yeah, so but like she actually made that in advance, right? So this is the kind of color that you get out of those ingredients. It's very bright yellow, like was kind of orange, but like now it's like really bright yellow. And and it's like kind of medium hydration noodles, and like we can tell by like the size of the dough, like kind of size of the crumbles of the dough, and it's very yeah, it's very yellow. And this is the kind of yellow that you see on Sapporo miso ramen noodles. And so what we do is that like this kind of machine, we first make like rough sheet of dough, right? Make rough sheet of dough, and it's like still like rough, like very fragile dough, and that's so we call this process like rough forming. And with this kind of machine, or we call this machine like Richmond one machine, and it's got like a big roller, one set like big rollers, and with these big rollers, you can well process really hard dough, and this dough is like probably 35 to 36% hydration, like 34, somewhere around there, medium, and that's a roll speed controller, and what we're going slow on purpose to apply like really good pressure in the dough. Yeah, so like as the hydration goes up, right? Like as we put more liquid, the bigger the size of the dough, right? And so, well, if you're talking about like udon noodles or something like that, like tsukume noodles, the dough would be like bigger. And up to this point, right? I mean, every type of like in this kind of noodle machine, every type of like noodles, has well like go through this process like rough forming first. Well, first mixing, right, and then like mixing time is also different. Like so, low hydration, the longest mixing time, like 15 minutes, and medium hydration, that's 10 minutes, and high hydration, like 5 minutes. So mixing time itself is like different, like depending on like the type of noodle you're making, right? And then so like next process like rough forming, right? Rough forming, and what we do next is that like we do this process called like combining process. Um, so it was like one single sheet, but like we are separating it right into two, splitting into, and then again like combining them through the rollers. By doing this process, right? Like what we're doing is that like we are working the dough, right? We're working the dough, or basically strengthening it, the gluten and everything, like so the yeah, the noodle texture will be like chewy and bouncy, yeah, by working the dough. And again, like this process is the same, right? This process is the same, yeah, like for any type of. So over here, like mixer, the was 4 minutes first, right? And then 6 more minutes for this dough. And add the rest of the water, liquid, and then mix it for 6 more minutes. So the total mixing time is 10 minutes. And but if you're making like Hakata tonkotsu style, like thin, hard noodles, you would have to mix it for 15 minutes, 5 more minutes, right? 5 minutes longer. And so combining process, like you basically like kind of combining these two sheets of dough into one, right, evenly. And so we usually do this process 1 to 2 times, depending on the type of noodles you're making. And so this is the second combining process. And so any type of noodle you're making, right? Yeah, you basically go through this combining process. So there's no difference in like um, amount of time like you spend on the production, or like so doesn't really change the production capacity at this point, to this point, right? So compounding. And then what you just turn on is that like that's automatic automatic duster. And yeah, because it has like relatively high hydration ratio, like kind of wet. So um, if we just keep going, right, they're gonna stick, right? So we want to start dusting, right? So dusting in the dough to make sure that like to keep them from sticking, right? And like if you're making like like tsukeme noodles or something like that, like high hydration noodles, like kind of wet noodles, then we should dust more. So you can adjust the amount of dusting. Okay, so after that, right, like all we have to do is just thin it, right? Thin it to the final thickness. But again, we want to like sheet this dough like gradually, not drastically, like gradually, to yeah, retain that like noodle texture that we developed, so far. And so want to gradually sheet it, right? So like so we apply this rule, like 30% reduction rule. So like every round like sheeting, like we reduce the roller gap by 30%. And so that's how gradual it is, right? So like that was 3 millimeter, and then now it's like 2 millimeter. right? And then next round like that's 1.5 millimeter, and and to the final thickness. So like um, and if you're making so like Hakata style ramen noodles, like which is 1.1 millimeter or so, like in thickness, then like how many times like you have to sheet, right? You have to thin. So that's where the production capacity kind of differs, like from like noodle type to noodle type. It's 1.5 now, 1.5 now, but like we can go faster, right? After combined process, and but still, like it's just the number of times that we have to sheet, right? That makes the difference, like in production capacity, and also um, we say that like well the machine's production capacity in terms of like well the number of servings you can make like in an hour, but um, that may like sound like misleading because like what well how many grams one serving, right? How many grams one serving? And it depends, right? It depends on the restaurant. It depends on you, right? It depends on like how much you decide on serving us, right? So uh, the one serving is 100 grams, like 150 grams, and that makes a difference too. So okay, so before we cut, right, like we yeah measure the actual thickness of noodles, and that's 2.1 ish, yeah. And so there's a difference of like maybe zero point 0.5, zero point 0.6 millimeter, and so that like noodle dough, like it expands, right? It expands like before, after like it's going through the roller gap, right? So it's a good tip to yeah measure the actual thickness before we cut it. Then there's a cutter we use, right? And then like it has this the plates, silicone plates, and then attached in the back of the cutter, and that's magic for this type of noodles. We're gonna start cutting this dough, and so the noodles coming out, and yeah, here's the parts, right? We put in the back cutter. It makes the noodles curly, and curly noodles, like kind of typical of kind of Sapporo miso ramen noodles, and they are very curly, and like well, you can actually adjust the curliness, right, by adjusting the parts, and and it really depends, like like so how much of one serving, right? How much one serving, and it's like Sapporo miso ramen noodle, well, maybe 130 grams or so, like 120 grams, 130 grams. And so even like in the same type of noodle, like Sapporo miso ramen noodles, like it change, like the portion size like varies from restaurant to restaurant. So yeah, so like, well, saying like, oh, this machine, like, it's capable like producing 100 servings per hour from scratch, can be different, right? If you're making like Sapporo miso ramen noodles or uh, something else, right? So you really have to know like what kind of noodles you're making, and what the serving size would be, right? As well, and also like hydration, like this is a 35, 36 hydration, and then so um, if you're doing like 10 kilograms, right, and then then 35, so like 3.5 kilograms of liquid, right? So that's 13.5 kilograms dough, and but like if it's Hakata style tonkotsu noodles, right? Then hydration is like typically like 28%, right? 28%. So that's 12.8 kilograms of dough, right? And so there's a different like and then if it's tsukemen, right? Let's say like 40%, so that's like 14 kilograms of dough, right? You get out of one batch. So that's a lot of difference, like in terms of like total weight of the dough. So you really have to be asking yourself, like, okay, what kind of noodle, like what type of noodle we're making, and what are the hydration ratios, and and then what are the size, right? The size means like thickness and width, right? And then yeah, and then like especially serving size, right, would be very important. Like so, um, the number of servings that you get out of like one batch of, for example, like 10 kilograms would be like really, I mean, dramatically different. Like if you choose to serve, like to choose out, like choose one serving at, like decide to have like one serving as like 100 grams or like 150 grams, right? So it would be like totally different. So you, yeah, and yeah, and then like noodle size, right? And then like if it's thinner, and you have to thin it like longer, like more times, right? So very different. Makes a big difference. And then um, make me prepare like some other dough, and these guys are ready to be cut already. And so this one is very thin noodles. Very thin noodles. Like I think like she had to do probably one or two more rounds of like sheeting to get to this thickness. So let's. And then we change the cutter, right? Change the cutter, and we use this kind of cutter, like we really think got like 26. That means like 1.2 millimeter in width. In width. And so like for us to like cut noodle, like cut the dough like with this cutter, like we had to thin the dough very to. So now it's cutting and noodles coming out, and so they're very thin noodles. It's very thin noodles, and the hydration is like low as well. So that means that even though it's like it's the same length, right? Let's say like same length as that, well, this Sapporo miso ramen noodles that we just made, they weigh differently, right? They weigh differently. So um, so you really have to know like so that so then that also makes that like oh this machine can make like 100 servings per hour claim maybe false, right? So usually this type of noodles like Hakata style ramen noodles, it's very thin and hydration is low. Um, and so that like well the each strand is like well weighs less than like thicker noodles and like or higher hydration noodles. And typically the serving size for this kind of noodles is 100 grams, like even like 90 grams or so. Yeah, because they serve small serving like in purpose. Because like these guys like cook get soggy, right? Get soft fast like in hot soup, right? So they are so like in small serving like on purpose, and then so that like customers can finish the noodles fast, right? And then while the noodles retain their like kind of unique texture, right? And the restaurant encourage the customers to like order like additional noodles if we put in the soup, right? So that's why they serve like they make small portions. Okay, so that was sort of like Hakata style tonkotsu ramen noodles, right? So it takes longer time to process this type of noodles than say like tsukeme noodles, like Sapporo miso ramen noodles, and yeah, and then like the portion size is smaller than the all these type of noodles, so it's different, right? So and there's another batch of dough that yeah we want to cut. So this is 12 2.5 millimeter width, right? So it's going to be high hydration noodles, and so basically thicker the noodles, right? Thicker the noodles, the higher the hydration. That's sort of like a rule or like kind of tendency. And so the last one is yeah, so like kind of dough that we use for tsukeme or like dipping noodles. Yeah, it's my favorite. And as like you see that like dough is kind of darker, kind of kind of healthier looking than yeah, because it contains the dough like flour, right? Flour we use like contains kind of high percentage ash content, which is basically minerals, so it's healthier. Okay, so we're cutting this dough out into noodles, and so this noodle, right, is way heavier than the Hakata style tonkotsu noodle we just did because it's higher in hydration and it's thicker, right? It's thicker, so they're very heavier than that type of noodles. And then tsukime noodles, right? Like usually the portion size tends to be like really big. That it's because like the tsukime like it has like the small portion like dipping sauce like which is like really intense, typically, right? In flavor and taste, right? And but like you're getting like smaller portion of soup, right? And so to sort of like compensate that, right? They serve you with like bigger portion noodles. So the typical serving size would be like 150 grams, like up like to like some certain ramen shops, like they serve you like or 200 grams, and like that's that fresh noodle weight, right? Fresh noodle weight. Like when you cook them, that typically, well, gets up to like, well, 1.6 times, like 1.7 times bigger in weight, right? So that's a lot of noodles. So, whether you're talking about Tsukemen noodles, like, Hakata style tomato noodles, like, or miso ramen noodles, um, the, well, noodle machine's capacity would be like, totally different, right? Totally different. Um, if it's Tsukemen noodles, you could make, but like, in terms of Tsukemen noodle, like, the serving size is bigger than the Hakata style ramen noodles. So you kind of really have to like calculate, right? You really kind of have to calculate, okay, what's my serving size and what type of noodle I'm making, and okay, so what's the hydration and stuff like that. So like, then we can tell, and we can do the calculation for you, of course. Yeah. So like if you buy this piece of equipment, like you should be able to like make, okay, 150 and 165 servings of this type of noodles in an hour from scratch. And if you buy this piece of equipment, like that goes down to, well, okay, 90 servings per hour. Yeah, stuff like that. So it's just up to what type of noodle you're making, and what your portion size would be, right, of this particular type of noodles, and what the hydration of the noodle be, right? So, all right, so we're taking the dough out, and yeah, so like that was like 4 kilogram batch, right? So then hydration would be like, that's 35% or so. So, and 5.6 grams or so. So, and yeah, so that's very yellow. Yeah, the dough, right? So like, that was pigment, like gardenia pigment we added, and the vitamin B2 you could use, right? Depending on like what's available. And yeah, you can ask us like, what you guys have like locally, and see like if we've tried that before, and how it came out, right? So you can just, yeah, ask like, before you try even, you ask us like those questions as well. So yeah, so we every single day, right? Like we get asked like these questions, about noodles, like ramen, like how to make like this particular type of ramen, or so, like something like that, or like what's trending in Japan right now, right? And Japan is like the, well, what like competition, like the most severe in terms of like ramen, like udon and stuff, like so. Yeah, we get asked a lot of questions, every single day from like, prospect, like from customers. So, and then we love that, right? We love it, and we love to do these kind of experiments and then everything. So, if you have like some questions, you're curious to about like, like trying to well, overcome this challenge or something, please let us know. And so maybe it's like going to like already the cleaning process of the mixer. And so what's interesting is that like, like we can clean the mixer by, well, putting the wet sponges in there and then like just run it, right? Run it for like 15 minutes or so, and it's all cleaned up, and then we just sanitize it, right? We just sanitize it like with alcohol or something to finish it, right? To keep the germs from growing there. So I say so. So that's what we have for this today's. You asked, like we answer this series, and so if you have any questions, you're curious to get answers to, so please send them in the comments, or like you know well, there's a contact form on our website, or like yeah, there's a blog like we have, like it's a Noodle Master Labs, and where you can ask a master a question. So thank you so much, and we see you back in the next class. So thank you. Bye bye.